How a 48-hour Rothschild loan bought the Suez Canal. On the night of November 14th, 1875, London looked like it was swallowing itself. Fog pressed against gas lamps like wet wool. Carriages moved like shadows with wheels. And inside that darkness, an empire wasn't making a military decision. It was updating a ledger. Most people think Britain secured the Suez Canal through strategy and imperial muscle. That's the bedtime story. The truth is colder and simpler. They didn't win anything with soldiers. They saw a balance sheet bleeding out, and they moved fast. This wasn't conquest. It was a transaction. A rushed purchase made under the pressure of bankruptcy and insolvency. The kind of deal that happens when a government starts to sound like a desperate borrower. And when the borrower is Egypt, the collateral is the Middle East. In the public imagination, history is decided in parliaments and on battlefields. But the real decisions happen in quiet rooms. They happen on paper. They happen when a creditor asks, "Can you pay?" And the answer is silence. Let that sink in. Picture the scene again. A Sunday night. Ministers and financiers pretending they aren't panicked. Somewhere in Cairo, a ruler is staring at his accounts like they're a coffin. Somewhere in London, a prime minister is doing math faster than morality. The telegram that arrived from Egypt didn't read like poetry. It read like a bank statement. It said the Khedive's treasury was empty. It said the interest clock was still ticking. And it said Egypt was ready to sell its shares in the Suez Canal. This is where the modern Middle East begins. Not with a speech, not with a flag, but with a debt spiral. A liquidation sale, a creditor's grin hidden behind velvet curtains. The canal was only 6 years old then, opened in 1869 like a fresh scar cut across the desert. It linked the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. It shortened the route to India by weeks. For Britain, it wasn't just a shortcut. It was oxygen. Before Suez, ships had to crawl around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. Months at sea, storms, disease, spoiled cargo. Every extra mile burned coal and cash. The canal turned those miles into profit. It turned time into money. And in empire, money is blood. Britain's wealth pulsed through India. Tea, cotton, opium, taxes. The crown's jewel wasn't a metaphor. It was an income stream, and the canal was the pipe that carried it. Cut the pipe, and the empire starts choking. Yet Britain didn't build Suez. They distrusted it. British engineers called it impossible. British politicians called it a French trap. They thought France was planting a knife in the trade routes, and they weren't completely wrong. The canal was driven by French ambition. Ferdinand de Lesseps became its public face. French capital and prestige flooded the project. A French company owned it. French investors held the majority, and Britain watched, irritated and exposed. So when the Khedive of Egypt offered his shares for sale, it wasn't a casual offer. It was a distress signal. It was a drowning man selling his life jacket. And Britain understood the price of delay. Because France would buy it if Britain didn't. Russia might try. Someone would. And whoever controlled Suez could squeeze Britain's throat without firing a bullet. That is what geostrategy looks like when you remove the romance. Now meet the seller, Ismail Pasha, Khedive of Egypt. A man who wanted to drag his country into modernity by force of spending. He wanted railways, palaces, opera houses, and European admiration. He wanted to look like Paris while standing on African soil. He built boulevards and hosted royalty. He staged spectacles that dazzled diplomats. He treated the treasury like a personal mirror. If it glittered, he bought it. If it impressed Europeans, he funded it. Egypt at this time looked like it was rising. New infrastructure, new institutions, new uniforms. The illusion of majesty was everywhere. Gold trim, marble halls, military parades that tried to imitate European discipline. But beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. Because modernity wasn't being paid for with domestic savings. It was being paid for with foreign credit. And credit is a drug that feels like power until it turns into a leash. Debt doesn't kick down a door. Debt enters politely. It offers you what you want today. Then it demands what you can't afford tomorrow. And Egypt was taking the loans like shots of whiskey. In the 1860s and early 1870s, Egypt borrowed aggressively from European markets. Bonds were issued. Interest piled up. Middlemen collected fees that smelled like theft. The numbers ballooned faster than the canals and railways ever could. This is the economic trap, an addiction. You borrow to build, then you borrow to pay interest. Then you borrow to borrow. And eventually you're not building anything. You're just feeding the monster. That monster had many faces. European bondholders, merchant banks, brokers who clipped coupons and called it finance. But the monster's voice was always the same. Pay us first. Pay us even if your people starve. Think about the cruelty of that arrangement. A country's harvest fails, but the coupon payment still comes due. A famine spreads, but the interest rate doesn't care. Debt is a machine. It doesn't feel. Ismail Pasha learned that late. His expenditures ran wild. His revenues could not keep up. Cotton prices, boosted during the American Civil War, had once filled Egypt's coffers. But markets change. Prices fall. And a budget built on optimism collapses fast. By the mid-1870s, Egypt's finances were in a vice. Obligations stacked like bricks on a sinking ship. The Khedive could not cut spending without losing face. He could not raise taxes without risking revolt. And he could not print money to escape because the creditors demanded hard payments. So he reached for the only asset that could buy him time, the Suez Canal shares. Not the canal itself, but Egypt's stake, a vital holding, a strategic lever. And now it was becoming a pawn. The canal had been sold to the public as a triumph of engineering. But in this story, it's a share certificate. It's a line item. It's collateral with sand on it. And collateral always ends up in the hands of whoever has cash. When the offer hit London, Benjamin Disraeli understood something brutal. This was not a diplomatic moment. This was a market moment. Whoever moved first would write the future. Britain could have debated it in Parliament. They could have formed committees. They could have argued about principles. And by the time the speeches ended, France would have signed the deal. So Disraeli chose speed over ceremony. He didn't go through Parliament at first. He didn't ask for a slow legal process. He did what desperate people do. He called a banker. He called the Rothschilds. The name itself sounded like locked vaults and silent power. A family network that stretched across capitals. They didn't need ships to control trade routes. They needed liquidity. This is where the thriller becomes real. Because the antagonist is not a general. It's not a rival empire. It's the bond market. It's the creditor class. It's the people who can say yes in an hour while governments take months. The Rothschilds could produce money quickly. not coins in bags, but credit, a loan, a bridge, a temporary injection of cash that would let Britain buy Egypt's shares before anyone else could. And they did it fast. The mythology says it happened within 48 hours. Whether the timeline was slightly longer doesn't matter for the feeling of it. What matters is the speed. The decision moved like a knife. Britain agreed to buy roughly 176,602 shares. The price was about £4 million. In today's terms, it's hard to translate, but you can feel the weight. It was a fortune. It was the kind of payment that can reshape borders without moving armies. Let that number sink in. £4 million for a controlling stake in a global choke point. Not a conquest. Not a treaty after war. Just a purchase, a receipt. The Rothschild loan made it possible. Britain didn't have the cash ready in the treasury. They had power, but not immediate liquidity. That's the secret humiliation of empires. They can rule half the world and still need a short-term loan. So the banker became the bridge between desire and control. Britain got the shares, Egypt got the money, and the Khedive bought himself time. But time bought with debt is never cheap, because selling the shares didn't fix Egypt's problem. It was a bandage on a severed artery. The debt remained. The interest kept compounding. And now Egypt had sold a strategic asset that could have been leverage in future negotiations. This is the rule of three, and it hits like tragedy. The gold was gone. The credit was frozen. The future was mortgaged. When those three align, collapse isn't a possibility. It's an appointment. After 1875, Europe's grip tightened. Britain and France didn't just want repayment. They wanted oversight. They wanted control of Egypt's revenue streams. They wanted to stand over the cashier's desk and watch every coin. Egypt's finances became a crime scene. Foreign commissions arrived to help. They audited. They reorganized. They demanded cuts and reforms that looked logical on paper. But on the street, those reforms meant hunger and humiliation. The language was polite. Stabilization, reform, fiscal responsibility. But what it really meant was this. Egypt was being repossessed in slow motion. The smoking gun moment in stories like this is never a gun. It's a document, a decree, a set of terms that look boring until you read the consequences. In Egypt's case, agreements and financial controls formalized foreign dominance over national income. It was foreclosure dressed as administration. It was liquidation disguised as advice. And the people signing it knew exactly what they were doing. Imagine the negotiation table. Not soldiers, but men in suits. Ink, not gunpowder. A creditor slides a paper forward and says, in essence, you will pay us first. The debtor looks down and realizes sovereignty has become conditional. You can paraphrase the brutal reality like this. Your customs revenue is ours. Your taxes are earmarked. Your budget is no longer your own. This is conquest without cannons. This is the ledger as empire. Insolvency doesn't just ruin a government. It invites a takeover. And that takeover doesn't need to declare itself. It can arrive as financial supervision. It can arrive with accountants. Disraeli and the British establishment likely told themselves they were securing trade. They were protecting India. They were acting in national interest, and maybe they were. But the mechanism was still debt. Because once Britain owned those shares, the canal became entwined with British survival. Any threat to Suez became a threat to Britain's bloodstream. And Britain would respond like an organism protecting its heart. Egypt's internal politics began to fracture under the pressure. Taxes rose. Landlords squeezed peasants. The army grew restless when it wasn't paid properly. Anger built in the streets and the barracks. And foreign influence became the symbol of national humiliation. When the default moment comes in a story like this, it rarely looks like a single missed payment. It looks like a society cracking. Red lines, unpaid wages, officials selling furniture, the state losing the ability to perform basic functions. That's the climax. Not a dramatic explosion, but a slow stop. Government offices without funds, soldiers without pay, farmers without relief, pride without backing. And this is where you need to remember the phrase, sovereignty is solvency. If you cannot fund your own state, someone else will offer to do it for you. And their offer will not be free. Foreign powers stepped deeper into Egypt. The canal's importance made Egypt too valuable to fail quietly. When instability rose, Britain saw danger, not moral danger, strategic danger, the kind that threatened shipping lanes and insurance rates. Control turned from financial to physical. Once you own the shares, you start asking how to secure them. Once you secure them, you start writing rules. Once you write rules, you're no longer a shareholder. You're a ruler. This is how a 48-hour loan echoes for generations. A rushed financial maneuver becomes a permanent strategic obsession, and the obsession reshapes the region. Egypt's experience became a warning written in bruises. Debt invited foreign supervision. Supervision bred resentment. Resentment bred revolt. Revolt triggered intervention. Intervention hardened into occupation. The chain is mechanical, and the canal itself became a symbol. A narrow strip of water that carried the wealth of empires while the surrounding land carried the cost. Ships passed through with cargo and coal. Meanwhile, Egypt's people carried taxes and austerity. Think about the imbalance. The canal made global trade faster and richer, but the country hosting it was treated like a delinquent borrower. That is the darkest irony of financial history. You can almost see the ledger being updated year after year, payments recorded, revenues pledged, budgets constrained. Each entry is a quiet surrender. Each payment is a piece of autonomy turned into cash. The generational aftermath of these deals is always longer than the headlines. The share purchase happened in 1875, fast and clean. But the consequences bled into decades of politics and conflict. That's how finance works. The transaction is instant. The damage is slow. Even when debts are eventually restructured or repaid, the scars remain. Institutions built under foreign oversight don't vanish overnight. The resentment doesn't evaporate. The memory of humiliation becomes political fuel. And if you zoom out, you see the wider truth. The Suez deal wasn't just about a canal. It was about who controls choke points, who sets the terms of trade, who can turn liquidity into leverage. Because a canal is not merely infrastructure. It is a toll booth for the world. It is a place where shipping schedules become geopolitical power, and whoever controls that toll booth can pressure nations without firing a shot. This is the core philosophy again. Armies follow budgets. Politics follows credit. Resources follow ownership, and ownership follows the ledger. The British Empire, for all its flags and fleets, still needed a banker's speed. Egypt, for all its dreams of modernity, was trapped by interest, and the Rothschild loan was the hinge. a financial hinge that swung open a new era. So when you hear the story told as a tale of imperial brilliance, remember the quieter version: a broke ruler selling shares, a prime minister bypassing debate, a banker providing a bridge loan, and a canal changing hands like a pawn in a debt game. It wasn't destiny. It was math. It was cash flow. It was credit. History likes to dress itself in uniforms, but the real costume is paperwork: contracts, shares, coupons, receipts, the kind of documents that never appear in heroic paintings. And if there's a lesson here, it's not about Egypt alone. It's about any nation that mistakes borrowed money for strength. The moment you rely on foreign debt to fund pride, you're building your palace on a trapdoor. Debt doesn't just demand repayment. It demands obedience. It demands priority. It demands your future, one installment at a time. So the next time someone tells you the Middle East was shaped only by religion, or only by war, or only by ideology, look at the balance sheet. Look at who owned what. Look at who financed what. That's where the real map is drawn. Because empires don't fall when they lose battles. They fall when the ledger turns red. They fall when bankruptcy becomes inevitable. They fall when insolvency forces them to sell their arteries. And sometimes the most important conquest in history happens in 48 hours, not with cannons, with a loan. If you want more stories like this, where the dark engine of money drives the world's biggest events, subscribe to the channel. Stay ahead of the people who only read the surface, because the surface is where the myths live. The truth is underneath, in the books, in the numbers, in the ledger.